So, what's up YouTube? Time for our next installment of Messed Up Christian Stories, this time facing yet another atheist professor and a student who is having a very, very bad day. A college class was led by an atheist professor, and every day he'd stand in front of his class and say, "Have you ever seen God?" To which nobody would answer. Then he'd ask, "Have you ever felt God?" And nobody would answer. Finally, he'd ask, "Have you ever heard God?" And, like all the other times, no one would answer. He would then say, "It is obvious that there is no God." One day, a Christian student had been having an extremely bad day. Her car broke down, her mother was sick, and her boyfriend was out of town. She'd also gotten a bad grade on one of her exams. She had been fed up with her professor's little act every morning, so she decided to do something about it. While the professor stood up at the beginning of the class and did his thing, the student had an idea. She got up and said, "Professor, would you mind if I said something?" He said, "Of course not. This is an expressive classroom, and I think it would be fine if you spoke your mind." The girl said to the class, "Have you ever seen our professor's brain?" And nobody answered. Then she asked, "Have you ever felt our professor's brain?" And nobody answered. Finally, she asked, "Have you ever heard our professor's brain?" And, like the other times, nobody answered. She then said, "It is quite obvious that a professor has no brain." And like this story before, once again, there are no names, there are no dates, no places, nothing. This is just, again, another confrontation that happened between an atheist professor and his Christian student. And what also happens to be a growing trend with these stories is that we yet again have another atheist professor who is a complete buffoon in his own regard. And in all honesty, I think this one's even crazier than the previous one, seeing as this one does his little act every day. You know, I think I'm starting to get a sense of deja vu already. So the professor's logic goes a little something like this. Does object A, in this case God, exist? Premise 1. You cannot see object A. Premise 2. You cannot feel object A. Premise 3. You cannot hear object A. Conclusion, object A does not exist. The main problem I have is that what we can objectively quantify can vary from person to person. And right off the bat, we can also call the professor on several fallacies that he's made with his argument, negative proof being the first. If you don't see, hear, feel, quantify this doesn't exist. It's an argument from ignorance, being that, well, just because he hasn't seen, heard, or felt doesn't mean that anyone else couldn't, and that doesn't mean that just because that no one else in the room has seen, heard, or felt God doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. The final sort of flaw that he's made with his argument is that he's essentially using this classroom of who the hell knows how many people as a representative for the entire population or of the entire scientific community. Like, oh, well, you classroom of kids haven't seen, heard, or felt God. God doesn't exist! Worship me, bitches! And as for the professor's claims, well, they're not exactly true. See, many people have claimed to see God or see Jesus. And, you know, the problem is not that people have not seen God. The problem is that for those who have, or who have claimed to have seen God, or who have claimed to see Jesus, there's no way to corroborate their story, and there's no way to determine objectively if they're right or wrong. And it's the same thing with people who claim to feel God or hear God. And I've heard many testimonies from many Christians who have claimed that they have seen or felt or heard God's voice. So, Truth, what are you trying to say? That you can't prove me wrong when I say that I've seen God or heard God or felt God's presence? Well, you're right. I can't prove any of those things wrong. I have not felt God, or at least I don't think I have. So I can't prove you wrong if you say that you felt God. I'm not you. What can I say? However, I will say that many people have felt similar, if not the same things, but of rival religions and of rival gods. And if you would not find that convincing, that someone has seen Allah or felt Allah's presence in their heart, then I honestly don't understand why Christians expect people like me to find that convincing. I guess I will be appealing to probability here, and therefore it might weaken this point, but I will say, which is more likely? That a person is hearing the voice of God telling them to slaughter millions of people, or that they're just batshit crazy? So with regards to what the girl said, can you see your own brain, or in this case the professor's brain? Sure. Just any number of the various types of scanning that hospitals use on a daily basis to analyze a patient's brain, for starters. I can empirically quantify that my brain exists, even if I haven't seen it with my own two eyes or felt it with my own two hands. So while the professor's argument was originally flawed and his thought process extremely sketchy at best, this girl did no better by trying to fight fire with fire. In fact, I think she dug a hole further for herself. May the truth always be heard.